Hello again and welcome back to another video. Today I'll talk about how to draw mountains for fantasy maps, and I'll share my step-by-step process, which is suitable for beginners just like me. I will also show you a few maps from some of my favorite fantasy books and a couple of pictures from Oxford where spring has just arrived. If you look at a fantasy map in a book, you'll notice that mountains and other features are often quite simplified. A fantasy map mountain isn't meant to look like a full realistic illustration of a mountain. They are often quite simple, interconnected mountains where one side is shaded to create a three-dimensional illusion. But there are other styles as well, like the mountains in the Wheel of Times books by Robert Jordan, that are more similar to geographical maps. But mountains can also be very simplified and drawn with just a few strokes, like the mountains that I drew for one of my first fantasy maps of Western Farraway. Drawing mountains for fantasy maps is actually quite easy, and as I will show you, if you can draw the letter V, you will be able to draw mountains for a fantasy map. Here are some of the mountains that I've drawn before. They are made by drawing several cones with a jagged edge, and then I've shaded one side of the mountain. I will show you how to do this step by step in a little while. If you are using a dip pen or other types of ink pens, you can use different thicknesses to create finer details, which also make the illustration more interesting and alive. Spring has arrived here in Oxford and the first spring flowers have awoken. I love this season when the apple trees are in full bloom and the bumblebees are busy with collecting nectar and pollen. If you're a little bit more advanced, you can try drawing fantasy map mountains using a dip pen. You can vary the thickness of your stroke by pressing harder or lighter. This takes a little bit of practice, but it isn't as hard as it looks like, so give it a go. I use the same method when using a dip pen as when I use a drawing pen. I start by drawing a cone and then I shade one side and add finer details. To draw hills, you can use the same method, since hills are just flattened out mountains or lower mountains. The hills can either be lower foothills or more rounded billowing hills. So this is a step-by-step method that I use for drawing fantasy map mountains. First, I start by sketching a set of three-dimensional cones with rounded bottoms. I use a thicker pen or press harder with the dip pen to draw the jagged mountain silhouettes. I then shade one side of the mountain by drawing several thin parallel lines next to each other. For the last step, I add a couple of thin lines to the other side of the shaded part of the mountain. And then I draw a few parallel lines to connect the mountains with the surrounding elements of the map. If you like me to make a video about how to draw fantasy forests, or if you like to share how you draw fantasy maps, leave a comment below. I always read all comments and it would be really interesting to know what you think. Here are a few of my previous fantasy maps that I've made and where I've used watercolors to add color to the maps. And this is the final results. This shows you the difference between using a drawing pen and a dip ink pen, as well as a step-by-step guide of how I draw mountains for my fantasy maps. I hope that you find this information in this video useful, and I hope that you will have a wonderful and creative day wherever you are.